Well, on the commemorating the 100th anniversary of the dedication of this church building, we are reminded that the parish was established in 1907, and this is the second church built here at the parish in between 1924 and 1925. But let's go even further back. Let's go even further back to the 1800s. Now, when Reverend Francis Norbert Blanchet, who was the first vicar apostolic of Oregon Territory, when he was appointed the Archbishop of Oregon City on July 24th, 1846, there was no Portland. And there was not yet even the thought of building a Portland. San Francisco was the closest settlement, and San Francisco was only a small Mexican outpost and a mission that was 600 miles away. There were no roads. There were only Indian trails and rivers which served as highways in most American frontiers. Now, this is because the Hudson's Bay Company was carrying on a lively fur trade here with the Indians, and the policy of the Hudson's Bay Company was to keep this territory as pristine and unsettled as possible in order to preserve its monopoly on the lucrative fur trade. So the company had a policy which required the trappers, most of them were French Canadians or Eastern Canadian Indians, they had a policy that the trappers would sign up for a service for a given number of years and then return to Montreal, Canada at the end of this service. But the trappers and the Indians liked it here, so they left their service and they stayed. Now, it was primarily from the Catholic Indian tribes such as the Iroquois, who came from the east. They had been evangelized by the North American martyrs. And they came and evangelized the local tribes. And so the first requests for priests came from the Willamette Valley and the banks of the Columbia. And an Iroquois named Ignace had so influenced the Flatheads by his teachings and example that the Flatheads, together with their neighbors, the Nez Perce, sent a deputation to St. Louis, Missouri in 1831 to ask for priests. So the two nearest dioceses were Quebec City, Canada, and St. Louis, Missouri. Well, so the first Mass in Oregon was offered in St. Paul, Oregon, on January 6th, 1839, by Father Blanchet. Now, at that time, the Oregon Territory was a mission of the Diocese of Quebec, Canada. And two missionary priests, Father Blanchet and Father de Smet, were promoting the idea of a diocese to be erected in the Oregon Territory. It was proposed then that Bishop Provencher, the auxiliary bishop of Quebec, be transferred to Oregon as its first bishop. And Provencher wrote to Father Blanchet the following: "You know that the Bishop of Quebec hopes to be relieved of your mission. I do not know how the project progresses, but who would want it?" Question. So the Bishop Signé of Quebec wrote in 1842, quote, "A portion of the territory in question is in dispute between the government of the United States and Great Britain as regards temporalities. All I know is that my diocese extends to the Pacific Ocean and comprises all the territory north of California, which has not been aggregated to any dioceses of the United States." Well, so St. Louis, Missouri in the United States was then the closest diocese aggregated to the United States. Well, the Fifth Provincial Council of Baltimore recommended the erection of a vicariate instead of a diocese because of the differences between the two governments with regard to Oregon. On December 1st, 1843, then, Pope Gregory XVI issued a brief forwarded to the Bishop of Quebec, providing for the erection of the territory of Oregon into a vicariate apostolic. embracing all territory between the Mexican province of California on the south and the Russian province of Alaska on the north. So from the border of California all the way up to the Russian province of Alaska, extending from the Pacific Ocean to the Rocky Mountains. And he further named Francis Norbert Blanchet as bishop and placed the care of the vicariate under his care. Now, Blanchet at the time was buried in the wilds of Oregon, and he did not learn about his appointment for nearly a year. And so the bishop-elect went on a small boat, the Columbia, and was at sea for 6 months on a journey around Cape Horn, which he passed on March 5th, 1845, and he did not make port in England until May 22nd. So 6 months on his way to London, England, where he spent 10 days. And from there he embarked at Liverpool to cross the Atlantic, arriving in Boston on June 19th and Montreal 5 days later. So now think about that. He went from Oregon around Cape Horn to England and then back to Boston and up to Montreal. That's how he got to Montreal. So he went to Quebec then to be consecrated bishop, only to find that the bishop was away. The bishop was away, he wasn't there. So finally on July 25th, over a month later, he was consecrated bishop in Montreal. And the new vicar apostolic then, as he was named, would never arrive in the vicariate of Oregon. Because while he was traveling to Oregon, by way of Paris, France, he went back to England, and from England to Paris, France. And before he got to Oregon, Pope Gregory XVI created an archdiocese in the Oregon wilderness and appointed Francis Norbert Blanchet as the Archbishop of Oregon City, which was a mere village, and he was the second only archbishop in the entire United States, Baltimore, Maryland being the first archdiocese, Portland, Oregon being the second archdiocese, and St. Louis, Missouri, under Archbishop Kenrick, as the third archdiocese. Oregon was a wilderness, and Oregon City, the see of the archdiocese, was a mere village at the time. Well, the new archbishop had sailed for Europe and was in Paris, France, when he heard of his elevation. Now, meanwhile, the church at Oregon City, dedicated to St. John, as it still is, was blessed and opened for divine service on Septuagesima Sunday, February 8th, 1846. But the bishop was not there. The archbishop was not there. So it was blessed and opened for divine service. It was not consecrated. And so, that was February 8th, 1846. Fast forward to August 17th, that the new archbishop landed at the mouth of the Willamette, and on the 19th, the missionaries with him and the sisters, the nuns, left for St. Paul, which they reached on August 26th. And the archbishop went directly to Oregon City and celebrated Mass at the cathedral, and then reached Champoeg the following day. He then went to St. Paul and celebrated a pontifical Mass there. Now, he had been the first priest to celebrate Mass in what would become the state of Oregon in 1839. And now, 7 years later, he returns as archbishop, celebrates Mass in that same church in St. Paul, after having been at St. John's Cathedral in Oregon City. He had been absent for 2 years and 7 months. It took him 2 years and 7 months to go to Europe, come back to North America, be consecrated, go back to Europe, and then get back to the west coast of the United States. Now, on November 1st of the same year, 1846, the church in Oregon City, the cathedral, was consecrated. And this was the first brick church in the region. The other churches were built of wood. So this was the first brick church in the region with a belfry, a bell tower. Okay, Now, in 1862, he moved to Portland, which was becoming a city, and built a co-cathedral of St. Mary's of the Immaculate Conception in Portland. Now, there were a few different co-cathedrals because they grew out of them, and on 3rd and Stark was a Gothic cathedral built. But the Willamette overflowed and flooded that part of Portland, and so they had to leave that cathedral behind and move into a temporary cathedral built at 15th and Davis Street. Meanwhile, a property had been purchased and was used for a boys' school taught by the Christian Brothers on the site of the current cathedral. So Archbishop Christie, who was the bishop until 1925, he was having this new cathedral built, and 11 months before it was completed, he died in April of 1925. Now, Archbishop Christie had an ambitious goal to build beautiful churches in the 1920s. And so a lot of these churches, like St. Stephen's, were built during that time period under Archbishop Christie, and that was when the church really made a splash. Beautiful new cathedral, all these beautiful new brick churches to replace the little old churches that were originally built. And this is when the Catholic Church really came into its own in the 1920s. But unfortunately, the Ku Klux Klan and the Scottish Rite Freemasons teamed up in an attack on the Catholic Church. And in the early 1920s, they proposed a ballot measure to the state of Oregon to outlaw Catholic schools, and that every family was required to have their children in public schools, and if they missed even one day, it would be a misdemeanor citation with a fine. And if they missed a second day, it would be another misdemeanor citation with a fine for every single day that the child would not be in public school. This was an effort to also forbid the teaching of foreign languages, for instance, Latin. And so in response, Archbishop Christie formed the Catholic Civil Rights Association of Oregon. And there was a great push to get Catholic citizens registered to vote. Now, on November 22nd of 1922, the measure went to the voting public, and the people of Oregon passed the ballot measure by 53%. And an appeal went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court and was deemed unconstitutional by a unanimous decision. And so the Catholic schools continued. Now, meanwhile, this church was planned and built beginning in October of 1924. Archbishop Christie was here for the laying of the foundation, the cornerstone, along with the baseball players Babe Ruth and Bob Musil, who happened to be in town for an exhibition. Well, Archbishop Christie laid the cornerstone, but he would not live to see the church completed, because in April of that year he died. And so the church was dedicated by Monsignor Hillebrand, who also ended up dedicating the new cathedral, which was completed 11 months after Archbishop Christie died. We didn't have a new archbishop until 1926, when Archbishop Edward Howard was consecrated bishop, or was named the Archbishop of Portland. Archbishop Howard served here as Archbishop for 40 years until 1966, and the only reason he retired was because the Second Vatican Council required him to retire because he was past the age of 75. But he lived to over 100, and his 100th birthday was celebrated in the Archdiocese of Portland many years later. Well, meanwhile, this church was built, and this church flourished and grew for many, many decades. Now, as happens with many places, this church had a time of decline, especially in the 1990s and the 2000s. The attendance, the school closed, attendance went down, families drifted away, a lot of families moved to the suburbs, but people also stopped having children during the 70s and 80s and 90s. And so the parish shrunk considerably. So the Legion of Mary, which in previous years was very active in this parish, is now active again, and it is a sign of hope. So what I'd like to ask you to pray for is that priests do not become discouraged. We have a lot of young priests in this archdiocese, full of zeal and talent and faith, and it can be discouraging to come into what seems to be a declining church. Now, of course, the church goes through its waxing and waning. We have a lot of Catholics in this city who don't go to church, and many of these city churches might seem pretty empty. It can become quite discouraging for a priest to have so few people respond to his ministry. And so I want to ask you to please pray for priests in this period of time. You know, Oregon has quite a Catholic history, and it has quite a Catholic future as well. Now it's up to all of us, too, to live our faith, to be good examples of the faith, and to share our faith, and invite people back to church. The church has so much to give. And as St. Francis said in the movie we watched last night, God doesn't want anything that you have. He wants your heart. And he wants the hearts of all of those who are living in these parish boundaries. And wherever you live, the Lord wants your heart, first and foremost. And that is a good message to take out with us. We could say that this church represents the heart of the Lord. It is our mother. It is our mother who embraces us, who wishes to gather us all together. But really, all the world, all these good people out there who have not thought about God. Well, the church has a mission in the past, and it has a mission for the future. And so we look forward now to what is ahead. And it is a bright future, because the Lord is light himself. So let us take that with us today, reflect upon it, and let that infuse our lives out in the world, and we entrust it all to God. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen.